Hi, it's Thursday, which means a special edition, another special edition of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted. I'm John, and I'm here again with my managing partner and son, not in that order, Jeremy. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm okay. Unfortunately, we begin in tragedy this morning. In Nashville, Tennessee, of course, another horrific school shooting. And our cliche, sadly, our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of all six victims and to those within the immediate vicinity. Our thoughts and prayers with the first responders. And the fact that we've had to talk about these things too many times. And so I thought, let's try to air it out quietly and calmly and try to answer this question. Assault weapons ban. We've had them before. 1994, in fact, it was Senator Joe Biden who was the principal author of an omnibus crime bill that included, among other things, an assault weapons ban. And the analytics that we have from that time period, a decade when it ran out and Congress refused to renew it, was that it made a dent. It made a difference. There was a reduction in these kinds of mass shootings. You know what the stats are last year, this year, just the first 3 months of this year already. Most of these are due, not all, but most of them are due to assault weapons. And the polls are clear. Almost 2 out of 3 Americans say that American gun laws, meaning gun control laws, do not go far enough. 2 out of 3, including almost half of registered Republicans, are for an assault weapons ban. But as we speak now, and again, here it is Thursday, there appears to be absolutely no sign whatsoever that there will be an assault weapons ban. Well, so let's start with the basics. We'll talk about this. Should there be an assault weapons ban? And is it why can't one be passed? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, my opinion. It's hard for me to say what others should and shouldn't do regarding when we're talking about. Well, let's be clear. We're talking about law-abiding citizens, right? We're talking about gun owners who gun owners with fully automatic or semi-automatic. And I say that because I don't know if the term assault weapon implies both fully automatic and semi-automatic. So I need to be clear on that, but let's assume it does, that the law-abiding citizens who own those guns, the well over 90% of them who are not criminals, who have gone through background checks, who have filled out paperwork to go into the FBI database to be approved to buy the weapon and have done all the legal preparatory work. I don't know what you do with those folks. We know that in the culture wars, that those who are in support of gun rights so much that they have a strict interpretation of the Second Amendment. This is just another part of that culture war that's already raging. So, I'm trying to move away from the partisanship, that the language that sets it up to look like, well, come on, these gun owners, especially the legal ones, they're the problem because they're the reason why all these people are getting shot. I don't like that language, and I'm not saying you're suggesting that, but all too often that is out there in the political landscape. I think that what we need is something more of a unifying approach that's sensible, where we can go after the problem of mental health and crime, okay, and not make legal, lawful gun owners the culprit, because that's the ultimate result. Is we then go into attack mode and say it's those crazy gun owners. They're just not giving up their. They're just not. You know, looking at it in a balanced way. So I mean that's kind of my off the top of my head response.
Okay, so so some basic questions, and these are as rhetorical as they are anything. Second Amendment rights, well-regulated militia. Um, what what are the limits? Do I have a right to a semi-automatic or an automatic weapon? You know, there have been studies over the years. Remember, I go back well over 50 years on this issue to the era of assassinations, and the numbers of uh, uh, domestic abuse cases that have turned into murder because a gun happened to be there. Um, it If there had been no gun, better than a 50-50 chance that the dispute might have been de-escalated. In terms of my right to bear arms as inviolable, it already is inviolable. I don't have a right to a tactical nuclear weapon. I don't have the right to have a cannon on my property. I don't have a right to have a surface-to-air missile in case there is a potential attack on my property from a drone or from a bombing. So we're parsing words here, but this is an anti-personnel weapon that shreds its target. So we've moved from beyond self-defense to the right to an arsenal. I mean, you read about this. How can this young woman have purchased weapons, automatic or semi-automatic weapons, in 5 different stores legally? I mean, what are the limits? First of all, I don't believe she has a right to that kind of a weapon. That's not consistent with any reading I've ever seen of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Those are a lot of different variables. And I mean, first of all, regarding whether or not someone has an access to a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun, and there's a domestic abuse, or there is domestic abuse in a relationship. I don't see how all of a sudden they just work it out and things don't get violent because there isn't a gun. There could still be some awful things that happen, a lot of awful things that happen. So I mean, then we get to, does somebody have a right to bear arms, and does somebody have a right to defend themselves, and where do we stop it? Do we stop it at a one shooter, a double barrel shotgun, a shotgun that loads 5 or 6 rounds, 7 rounds, 10 rounds, a semi-automatic that can pulse like 1, 2, 3, 4, or spray 3 or 4? But I don't know. I don't know what the magic number is, and I don't think anybody knows what the magic number is. And so now we're getting into some slippery territory, because the fact of the matter is, this is the way I see it, America has a violence problem, and oftentimes it involves guns, but there's no reason to believe that in comparing other nations where there's demographics are much more homogeneous, I don't know that that's the way to do it. But if we all of a sudden just got rid of guns, you're telling me that the pent-up anger and the mental health crises wouldn't manifest in other brutal forms with other brutal weapons?
Look, I I don't want to use the word human nature. I don't want to use the word prone to violence. I think there's plenty of evidence to show that given the whole sweep of the history of humanity, we're probably less prone to violence and have more barriers and education available to limit violence than ever before, with one exception, and that is the presence of guns is a near and present danger to escalate those with the behavior of those with anger issues, mental health issues. Now, I mean, here's the other thing: um, mental health. Of it's an enormous problem, and it's not only the problem in and of itself. It's the fact that there is not a community, urban, rural, suburban, in this country that is well served in its mental health services. Okay, given all that, but it's hard to make a case that anyone who says the problem is not guns, it's mental health. I'm going to be blunt here. Do they really give a shit about mental health? I think it's a smokescreen. I think it's a way of changing the topic away from the fact that we willingly place and enable people to purchase or to possess not only automatic or semi-automatic weaponry, but multiple caches, heavy artillery uh, levels, arsenals of these kinds of weapons, and yet we cry mental health. There's something wrong with this. We were able to get it before. Why weren't we able to get it after Newtown? I mean, look at that case right there. Yes, this was a poor, mentally health challenged young man, but his mom had guns, automatic weaponry all over her house. He goes and shoots up these poor little babies and some adults, and yet no action is taken because that's a denial of my legitimate right to possess and overpossess these kinds of weaponry. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we have a whole section of this country that live in rural areas, mm-hmm. and it's not just Americans who live out in the country. It's also in the suburbs and in the city regarding gun ownership. But I mean, you're going to find more likely those who have land, who have acres of land or have access to acres of hunting grounds, are going to own what you would call a quote unquote arsenal. They're going to have various rifles. They're going to have various kinds of semi-automatics. Maybe they're going to have fully automatic rifles in the states that allow them. But these folks aren't the problem. Okay. And so what I worry is that we get back right into the culture war. And now there's a scapegoat. It's these gun owners. If we didn't allow folks access to these weapons, we wouldn't have, or we would have less violence. Meanwhile, and I know I've talked about this, but it's worth mentioning again. Meanwhile, you go to case studies of cities throughout this country where it is nearly impossible to own a weapon. I mean, the laws, say in Chicago, make it very, very difficult to access handguns and rifles. They're some of the strictest in the nation, and yet we still have a different type of violence. We have gang violence. Why is it that school shootings get all of our attention and our make the news and get us rattling and angry and talking about guns, why aren't we looking at the gun violence the gang violence that's out of control in cities where it's supposed to be impossible to get weapons? That's a case study that's important because it makes the point that no matter what legislation you pass at the city, state, national level, there is still going to be access to weapons on the black market, and that won't do nothing to prevent people who are prone to act in violence, like this woman or transgender woman. And I mean, to me, that's very clear. I don't see how. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, honestly, we've talked about this privately a lot, and it's a smokescreen. I mean, the fact is that on one level, you're talking about gang violence. You're talking about two warring factions killing each other, and innocents do get caught in the crossfire. On the other hand, you're talking about school shootings or mass shootings like at the Tops Market in Buffalo, where you're talking about a lone individual or perpetrators, and totally innocent people, in most instances unarmed, doing shopping or being in school and so on. So obviously it's different. It's not a war. It's
but the
it's a
difference
crime.
is that the violence is, it doesn't matter whether it's between criminal gangs or a criminal gang shooting on kids. Human lives are being lost and there's violence. Sure. And the violence still exists wherever there are strict gun laws. But the thing that the national media will always ignore is that just as often as there's a school shooting or there's a public shooting, there's a bystander, this often happens, who prevents a shooting, who's carrying a gun. This happened after Uvalde. Everybody was talking about Uvalde, but nobody talked about how that same week in West Virginia, there was a woman who was carrying a 9mm concealed, and she was at an outdoor barbecue, and a man came out with an AR-15, and he was going to spray on a crowd, and she stopped it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if that woman wasn't able to obtain a 9mm because of difficult gun legislation, but that person was still able to get an AR-15 on the black market, what good does that do? So that's the conversation that we need to be having, is getting at the root of the problem, not so much the instrument, but the sickness within our society where this is becoming a daily occurrence that people lose it and smell, see, and desire and want blood. That's the problem.
You don't empower the root of the problem by making it easy to get instruments in their hands.
And you don't make the problem worse by punishing the vast majority who are lawful and legal abiding citizens. So,
okay, we're going to agree to disagree, or just simply disagree to disagree. How's that?
I was going to go with the latter.
All right. All right. Sadly, I think we're going to be talking about this again. What do you think? Shall we call it a day, or do we talk about the Republicans a little bit?
Why don't you closing thought, and I'll give a closing thought on
guns,
on Republicans.
Oh, all right. Okay, we've got some building action to change the subject on the Republican side. We have a non-declaration of interest on the part of Governor Chris Christie, former Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, and we have rumors of some other names, entering the race. But first and foremost, there's an interesting dynamic taking place between Trump and his former protege, Ron DeSantis. And Trump said this past week that DeSantis is dropping like a rock. And it does appear, just from the polls, that what had once been a kind of a tight race between Trump and DeSantis has now become Trump solidifying his base among Republicans, and DeSantis really dropping like a rock. Just a quick observation about that. I've always thought that Ron DeSantis could very well peak too early. Way too early is the flavor of the month, and very difficult to be the governor of a state enacting legislation and angering a lot of people, including a lot of powerful people. Sooner or later, things would break. And among his chief problems is that he's just not a good campaigner. Yes, he won from a close race 4 years ago to a runaway landslide just last year, but he's not good on the hustings, and you've got to be in Iowa and New Hampshire. You have to meet with people. He doesn't seem to be very good at that. And lastly, I would say about Chris Christie, my reading of campaigns, particularly recent ones, is you have to seize your moment. So 1988 was Bob Dole's moment. He ran and he blew it. Tried to come back in 1996, and by that time, he was deemed too old at the age of 73. On the flip side, Barack Obama, there could have been there was a powerful argument that the young man should wait. Only in his mid 40s, just fresh into the US Senate, wait till he had a little more experience. But it was his moment, and he seized upon it. I would argue 2012 was Chris Christie's moment to challenge Mitt Romney. Christie was a phenomenon, kind of a straight talk, tough prosecutor, tough governor with very high favorable ratings. He opted to not run in 2012, came back 2016. I think by that time it was too late. And of course, there was the George Washington Bridge scandal, which I think is something that he can never quite put in his past. So right now, if you were to ask me, I would say Republicans are tired of Donald Trump, but he's probably on a path to win the nomination.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm still angry with Chris Christie, because you remember our trip to France that we took with my brother Ben, our other business partner, and we were late because of George Washington Bridge, and we missed a whole day. So that's Chris Christie's fault.
Yes, it is. America.
No, but to DeSantis's point, what I think is we'll see if he can grow into a campaign. I mean, we do have to leave the room the possibility that enough people can pull him aside and say, hey, the consensus is you're an arrogant SOB. You need a coach, and you need to start working on some things, and you have to have a better appeal. And so, I mean, I don't want to say that DeSantis is toast. I don't want to say that he's finished, but aside from the obvious arrogance or not going on the ground in Iowa and not meeting with people and doing things that Iowans do, I think a bigger problem for DeSantis is that, yeah, he's wildly popular in Florida, and he won in a major landslide, but his battle is a battle of really culture wars. His leadership within Florida makes a lot of sense to think that he's a big deal, but then to take that and do a presidential roadshow, I don't think is enough. In other words, he needs to move beyond Ron DeSantis, the culture war warrior, the man who kept Florida open during COVID so that the economy didn't crumble, which is very important to Floridians. Let's not undermine that. But this is the presidency. Is that a guy who can broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia? Is that a guy who can, who can oversee the Middle East? Is that a guy who can deal with the issue with China and Taiwan? Is that a guy who can be really the leader of the free world and in an increasingly multipolar world, the rise of China, the rise of Russia, with all the nations like Iran and Saudi Arabia, those poles shifting? Is he the guy for that? And I think a culture warrior looks a little parochial when you open up the global playing field which is the nature of being a president. So I think he has a lot of growing to do if he's serious about that. And that's where I'll end it.
Well, we all have a lot of growing to do, but growing on the campaign trail is not the ideal place when you're talking about running for the presidency. You got to try to grow first.
Well, no, I mean growing into the campaign, right?
Yeah,
that is
I followed you, but I followed you, but I was following me too. So
yeah,
okay, all right.
Well taken.
Have a good weekend. We'll see folks either next Friday or more than likely next Friday's Good Friday. So
yeah,
I think So more than likely we'll have a special edition of some sort.
All right.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right.